Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So, Tarek and Returning Series, is that an analog in your pocket or are you just happy to see me? And today we're going to be going over Analogue OS version 1.2, a recent update that Analogue just released for the Analogue Pocket. And it seems like a precursor to a much bigger update that we're going to be getting around Christmas time, but I'll go over that later in the video. But there's a lot of awesome quality of life improvements to the 1.2 version of the OS, and it fixes some things that were a little bit of a sticky point in earlier revisions. So let's go over the installation process, how to get that firmware, how to install it, what it's going to bring to you. If you pop over to the Analogue website, you'll see this firmware page right here, and you're going to see that firmware came out 3 days ago on December 7th. Well, we've gotten to this video earlier, but I had to go see Die Hard in theaters. It's a Christmas movie, folks. You should definitely be watching it. Super easy to download it. There's a big download button. You know what to do with that. But let's go over the release notes in and of themselves and talk about what is going on here, because this is the 1.2 revision. We're coming up from 1.1 on most pockets. Not that it really ever downloads poorly, but there is an MD5 hash here as well to make sure the file is good before you put it on your SD card, but honestly I really wouldn't worry about that too much. You should be totally fine. Now on the OS side, it fixes some sleep and wake issues that the Pockets had, and I have noticed those especially while docked. The other thing that I've noticed that it fixes that isn't in the release notes is that I would sometimes not get audio over HDMI docked unless I restarted the Pocket. That seems to be fixed as well. But it's dealing with some save states here that may have been problematic before, and of course you don't want to lose your save state, so having that is great. Another fun feature, mostly for me, not for you, is that I can now shoot the Analogue Pocket with the screen on and the buttons work when it is in docked mode. It'll be good as a filmmaker, but honestly, unless you want to see two screens at once, a fun addition for sure, but maybe not one that you're really going to utilize all that often. Now on the OpenFPGA side, the framework's been updated to 1.2, and I think that is the anticipation of the 2.0 release, which is going to bring a lot of screen filters that people have been desperately asking for, but we will go over those in just a bit. On the dock side of things for OpenFPGA, it does seem to make things more stable, especially for that audio coming out of dock mode, because losing the audio would drive me nuts on captures. But the great news is there's a lot more controller support here, and it fixes some things that didn't work before, including 8-bit Do Neo Geo CD controllers and the PlayStation 5 controller in pairing. Now I had talked to some people that had had some success at pairing their PlayStation 5 controller wirelessly to the dock. I was never able to get this done. Even when I did my controller guide, I listed this as working, but only as wired. I was never able to get these two things to have a handshake and work on the dock, so PlayStation 5 controllers were just out. I said it worked wired. I can now confirm that on the new OS, you can sync these controllers up. They work totally fine, and that is great. Now, Analogue will give you directions on how to install the firmware, but I'm going to go over that with you now. Go ahead and take out your micro SD card. I've shown you in the setup guide how to get this set up, but if you haven't done it yet, or if you get a Pocket for Christmas, I will leave a link to it in the description below. These are all the files you should have when you've set it up once. You're going to see we have Pocket Firmware 1.1, that's an older firmware, and you need to delete any other old firmwares that are on your micro SD card before you continue with the process. So make sure whatever firmware you have that's not 1.2, you remove it from your SD card. From there, just go ahead to your downloads folder and you can copy and paste that Pocket Firmware 1.2 over to your micro SD card. Just put it in the root. It doesn't go in any folders or anything like that. It takes about 2 seconds in real time to copy over. Now you can run Pocket Updater, and this should also pull down the firmware, but since it's so new, I'm just showing you guys how to do this from the Analogue website. And anytime you have your micro SD card out, I definitely recommend you run Downloader and just do Update All. It'll bring down all the newest cores and anything else you may need and may have missed since the last time you had your micro SD card out. And like I said earlier, this should bring down the newest firmware as well, but since this is a very new update, I'm showing you both methodologies on how to go ahead and update your Pocket. But once you got that firmware copied over, you can pop the micro SD card out and do the hardest part of the entire procedure, which is to get that card seated back in the Pocket. It's not a Pocket problem, it's just how micro SD works. It is a very hard thing, and it's fiddly in my opinion. Once that card is back in, go ahead and turn your Pocket on, and you'll immediately see this percentage counter. This does take some time. Definitely make sure your battery is 100% charged before you do this. You do not want to lose battery power while you're updating the firmware. It's going to be a bad time if you do. So take your time. If you need to put it on wall power for a little bit, go ahead and do so. You will know that it is working even if the percentage sits there for a little bit, because there's going to be that flashing yellow light at the bottom of the Pocket, and it'll take about 3 minutes and 7 seconds in my experience. That's how long the time code on the video that I ran was, so that's what you can expect here. And once you get into the Pocket settings again, you can go ahead and look at the OS version. You're going to see we're at 1.2, and it's going to have all of the same notes that we talked about from the Analogue website. Now I'm assuming we're going to be onto 2.0 very soon, but I will get to that in just a same moment as well. But there's a lot of fun updates here, and I'm going to go through some of the biggest ones with you. Obviously, this is just a camera trick. I'm not actually using the Pocket Dock. It's just easier on my table. But now you can get the screen to work while it is in dock mode, and the button should work as well. And that is a nice thing to have here. I don't know who's going to really use it, but for me as a filmmaker who does a lot of videos on this, I actually love this. I'm going to be able to just go ahead and utilize certain features and be able to shoot it a little bit easier in the background. But we're not done with the setup and update process yet, because we now have to update the dock. Part of the firmware that you're putting onto your Analogue Pocket is going to update the dock when you plug it in for the first time. And if you're new to Analogue and you don't have a dock quite yet, don't worry about it, but I do have that setup guide down below. And you'll see here the minute that you dock the Analogue Pocket, you're going to get a screen through your HDMI signal, and it's going to say upgrading dock. This takes about as long as upgrading the actual firmware, and it is just one of those things. You have to be patient and wait, but don't think the bar is not moving. I'm sure it is. This took 3 minutes and 5 seconds, so it's very close to the same amount of runtime that it would take to upgrade the firmware on the Pocket itself. And as a very lazy shot, this is what it's going to look like. You'll see here that you have the screen on both ends of the Pocket. But if we go into the settings, there's a couple fun things to play around with here, but the number one that I take away from this update is the fact that we have a lot more controller support. People have been really asking for that for Analogue Pocket, and some of the controllers that were supposed to work didn't. But having the 8-bit DOE Neo Geo controller as well as the PlayStation 5 controller working, and having PS5 work wirelessly is a huge deal, because I've got 4 of these controllers. It's one of the preferred controllers I like to use on pretty much any game system, even if it's not PlayStation based, so it's great that both of these are now functioning. Now if you move over to different settings right here and we go into this menu, if you go all the way down, you're going to see an option, and that is going to say dock display. You can toggle this on or off. Again, I'm not sure who's going to use this, so leave me a comment down below and tell me if you're really interested in it. But if you go over to developer, it's going to be in there at the bottom. Do with it as you will. But let's move over to a couple other settings. A lot of the other things that I've noticed that have been added really aren't useful to the end user whatsoever. But if we go into settings and dock, there's going to be a couple fun things to play around with. But again, the expanded controller support is my favorite from this update. In video, you're going to see 480p is grayed out. If you want to see me try to get the Analogue Pocket working with the dock on a CRT monitor, leave me a comment down below. I've been kind of noodling around with the idea. Let's see if you guys want to see it. And of course you have 50 kilohertz PAL support too as well. Well, I'm assuming not many people are going to do that, and limit RGB range. It's not checked by default. I would leave it just as is. But there's a lot of fun to be had here, and again, that's how you confirm that you're on OS 1.2, just by going into the OS settings. Now it does seem like the 2.0 OS is coming very soon. They're promising it by Christmas, and they have definitely been talking about this for a while. This is going to bring all of the different original display modes, as well as a new CRT Trinitron, which is from Sony. They just don't put the Sony name there, I'm sure, because of branding. This will bring it over to FPGA, all of those open cores in the menu. And it looks like the Pocket adapter set has been delayed to February 2024. I'm sure I will get a pair in. If you want to see a video on that, leave me a comment down below as well. But that's kind of the current situation with the OS. It's at 1.2 now, and I will say also getting the Neo Geo CD pad over to the dock is absolutely incredible. Playing shmups on this thing, playing Neo Geo games, Battle Garaga here, it just feels so much better with that clicky thumbstick if you don't want to use a full arcade stick. And it was one of those things that kind of almost sort of worked when the controller came out, but there was a lot of caveats to that statement, and I basically said that I didn't recommend you try it. Now you could 100% go ahead and do that today, or if you want to use your PlayStation 5 controller because you don't have a Neo Geo CD pad from 8-bit DOE, you can do that too. But my presumption is 1.2 is fixing a lot of the underlying framework to get those different screen filters over to OpenFPGA by Christmas. So hopefully when you open up your Christmas gifts on December 25th, you're also going to be updating your Pocket. I'll do a video a couple days after. I'm definitely not doing it on Christmas morning, but that is the current situation with Analogue Pocket. It's got a new firmware, and it should be getting another one soon. But if you have any issues with the installation whatsoever, leave me a comment down below and I'll try to help you out. But go grab your micro SD cards, download that firmware, follow the install guide, and play around with it today. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.